Millionaire gives $100 to a homeless girl. 15 years later, she returns with a surprise. On that cold night, as the wind cut through the deserted streets, Nathan Cole, a man who had everything, wealth, prestige, power, crossed paths with someone who had nothing. The encounter lasted less than a minute. $100 bill, a timid smile, and the silence of a goodbye that felt final. What Nathan didn't know was that this small gesture was about to change two lives, hers and his. 15 years later, in an elegant hall filled with curious eyes, a confident, imposing woman walks toward him. There's something familiar in her gaze, something Nathan can't quite place. Then, with a steady voice, she says something that freezes time. "I've waited a long time for this moment, Mr. Cole. And, finally, it's time to return what you gave me." But what exactly did she come to return? And why, after so long? The light drizzle trickled down the marble sidewalks of Washington Square Park, casting golden reflections under the streetlights. The night was cold, but Nathan Cole, wrapped in his Italian wool overcoat, barely felt the biting wind. His mind was elsewhere, on meetings, contracts, and numbers, as always. At 42 years old, he was the definition of success, a renowned businessman, owner of luxury hotels and prestigious wineries. But beneath his armor of wealth lived a lonely man, exhausted by a world that seemed to spin only for profit. His footsteps echoed on the wet pavement as he walked briskly. The dinner with investors had been just another empty exchange of fake smiles and disguised interests. He hated it, but he knew how to play the game. That's when he heard it. "Sir, please." A small, fragile voice, almost swallowed by the rain. Nathan stopped and looked around. Under the awning of a closed shop, a girl in tattered clothes clutched a dented can. Her face was dirty, her hair tangled, but her eyes, those eyes were alive, starving for more than food. He could have ignored her. How many times had he seen scenes like this? New York was full of forgotten souls, but something, an invisible thread, kept him from walking away. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching to meet her gaze. The girl hesitated. Her face, hardened by life, was far too young for such weight. "Emily," she replied softly, gripping the can tighter as if it were her lifeline. Nathan felt a strange tightness in his chest. It wasn't pity, it was something else, something deeper, almost unsettling. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the first bill he found. $100. "Here, Emily, buy yourself something warm." Her eyes widened in shock. No one had ever given her so much. She took the bill with hesitant fingers as if it might vanish. Then, with a seriousness beyond her years, she murmured, I'll pay you back someday, sir. I promise." Nathan chuckled lightly, almost bitterly. Promises. In the adult world, they meant so little. "You don't have to, little one, just take care of yourself." Without waiting for a reply, he stood up and walked away, certain that this small scene would fade into the blur of forgotten moments. He had no idea that her promise would travel through the years like a silent shadow, waiting for the right time to be fulfilled. The years passed like a whisper, but for Emily, that night under the awning never stopped burning in her memory. The $100 bill wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a spark that lit something more powerful than hunger or cold: hope. The morning after meeting Nathan, Emily didn't splurge on a big meal or fleeting comforts. She bought a simple sandwich and a notebook. Her small, dirty hands ran over the smooth cover, and her eyes glowed with a hunger far greater than survival. She wanted to win. With the notebook clutched to her chest, she began visiting the public library. She had no address, no documents, but she had something no one could take: determination. The librarian, a gentle older man named Peter Hayes, noticed the little girl always hiding between the shelves. Intrigued by her constant presence, he chose not to chase her away. Instead, he began leaving children's books within her reach, and Emily devoured every word. The nights stayed cold, and the streets remained harsh. Emily slept in shelters when she could, on church steps when she couldn't, but every day she returned to the library, and with every page turned, her thirst for knowledge grew stronger. She taught herself to add, to write, and even to dream. One golden afternoon, as the sunlight bathed the bookshelves, fate knocked again. "What are you reading?" asked a soft, curious voice. Emily looked up and saw an elegant woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. A book about business, Emily answered with raw honesty. I want to learn how to make money. The woman smiled, surprised by the ambition in such a young voice. My name is Margaret, she said gently. Would you like to tell me your story? And Emily told her simply, openly, with nothing to hide. Margaret, a successful entrepreneur in the education sector, felt something rare: inspiration. What if I helped you go to school? She offered, her eyes bright with hope. I could help you get a spot. Emily's heart raced, but instead of shouting with joy, she answered seriously, If you help me, I promise, I'll make it count. And someday, I'll repay this too. Under Margaret's mentorship, Emily plunged into her studies with the ferocity of someone fighting for survival. Her passion for business grew, fueled by one driving force: to find Nathan Cole again. She never forgot the man who, with a single gesture, had turned her world upside down. But she didn't want to meet him as the girl he once helped. She wanted to stand before him as a woman ready to give back. And quietly, she began searching for him. Nathan Cole's name, once a symbol of power and prestige, had started to fade like a shadow at dusk. For years he ruled over luxury hotels and vineyards, sealing deals with a firm handshake and a gaze that left no room for doubt. But the world of high finance is a ruthless arena, where one misstep can topple even giants. His fall began quietly: an investment in an international luxury hotel chain. Analysts promised astronomical returns, but a global economic crisis turned dreams into dust. Reservations plummeted, shareholders demanded answers, and Nathan, too proud to ask for help, faced the storm alone. Then came the lawsuits. Partners who once toasted him with champagne now accused him of mismanagement. Banks froze his credit lines. Journalists lined up to savor his downfall. And Nathan, proud and solitary, fell, with no one to catch him. Friends vanished with the profits. Those who once begged for a seat at his table now ignored him on the street. Even his ex-wife Caroline walked away, not only with their shared assets but with the last remnants of affection. He sold his properties, his cars, his art, everything to feed the monster of his debts. But it was never enough. In a matter of months, his penthouse with its view of the Empire State Building was gone, and with it, his world. One cold night, under the iron sky, Nathan sat on a park bench. His once polished shoes were scuffed, his tailored coat frayed. His hands trembled not from the cold but from the crushing emptiness inside him. How did I end up here? He whispered, his voice barely reaching the pavement. Then, a sudden flash of memory struck him. The street, the rain, a pair of young, hungry eyes. Emily, the dirty face, the promise, the $100 bill. He chuckled, but it was dry and hollow. Maybe I was wrong, he muttered to himself. I thought I was helping her, but maybe I was helping myself. He sighed deeply, his voice cracking with a rare vulnerability. And now, who helps me? But life rarely answers with words. It watches and moves when you least expect. At dawn, as Nathan tried to find shelter under the awning of a closed shop, the same kind where he once met Emily, someone was watching him from across the street. A woman, strong, poised, her eyes sharpened with recognition. But no, not yet. The next morning, the sky over New York was gray, as if the city itself sensed that something important was about to unfold. Nathan, clutching the loose Nova Foundation card tightly between his fingers, felt the weight of every step. His mind was a whirlwind. Who was that woman? Why did she say I helped her? And why? Now. The streets, once a stage for his triumphs, now seemed unfamiliar. But as he stood before the imposing facade of the foundation, an elegant building with marble columns and a modest sign, he felt something unexpected, a silent calling. He drew a deep breath and entered. The reception area was bright and welcoming, lined with photographs, children studying, community projects, charity events. The place breathed hope. A receptionist greeted him with a warm smile. Mr. Cole? Nathan nodded, unsure of himself. The director is expecting you. Please, follow me. The hallway felt endless. His footsteps echoed softly, and with each step his heart pounded harder. Finally, the double doors opened, and there she was. The woman from the cafe stood by a tall window, the city skyline stretching behind her. Hearing the doors, she turned. But this time This time there was something different in her eyes, something he recognized, but couldn't place. "You came," she said, her voice soft, yet charged with emotion. "I don't know why," Nathan replied, tension thick in his voice. "Who are you? Really?" The woman took a step forward, and in that single step, she crossed years of untold history. Then, with a calmness that seemed to stop time, she spoke. "My name is Emily." Nathan felt the floor vanish beneath him. The name, the night, the girl under the awning. His mind collided with the past, stumbling through shock and disbelief. "Emily?" His voice barely found the word. "That's impossible. You were..." He trailed off, the sentence unfinished. "A girl on the streets," she finished for him, her voice steady but rich with feeling. "A girl you helped with $100 bill, and who never forgot." And then Emily told her story. The notebook she bought with his money, the library and the man who let her read in secret, the cold nights, the lonely battles, and Margaret, the woman who gave her a chance at school and guided her path. "But above all, Nathan," she said, her voice tightening, "it was you who lit the spark. You gave me the first reason to believe in myself, and I promised you I would return it." Nathan's chest ached with emotions too tangled to name. Pride, surprise, and guilt. His voice was rough, barely holding steady. "I didn't do anything. You fought. You made this life." Emily stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. "But you struck the match." Then with a slow, deliberate motion, she extended an envelope. Nathan opened it, his hands uncertain. Inside, he found a document. A job offer. Position, Director of Community Projects, Luce Nova Foundation. His brow furrowed, confusion and disbelief flooding him. "You're offering me a job?" he asked, his voice raw. Emily smiled softly, but behind it there was something more, something profound. "I'm offering you more than that," she answered. "I'm offering you a purpose." She gestured to the walls, the photographs of children, the smiling faces of those who had been given a chance. "This foundation exists," Emily continued, her voice clear and strong, "to give others what you once gave me, a spark, a door, a reason to hope." Nathan's throat tightened. He who had lost everything, now in front of him, was something that felt like everything. "Why?" he managed to ask, his voice trembling. "Why me?" Emily's eyes softened with a depth of meaning that reached far beyond words. "Because, Nathan," she said, her voice thick with feeling, "I'm not here to repay a debt. I'm here to continue the cycle you started." Nathan didn't answer immediately. That night he wandered through the streets of New York, the offer burning in his pocket. Her invitation echoed through him, bridging who he was and who he could be, the man who built empires, and the man who had lost them all. But beneath the weight of his past, something flickered, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. At sunrise, he returned to the foundation. Emily stood waiting, her expression unreadable. But when Nathan met her eyes, his held something new. Emotion. Resolve. "I accept." Emily's lips curved into a smile. But it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of a new beginning. The days that followed felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. Nathan knew. Refusing Lorenzo Greer wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war. The attacks came swiftly. Sudden financial audits. Anonymous rumors spreading online, accusing the foundation of corruption. Calls from donors, hesitant, nervous, some withdrawing their support. The strikes were precise, calculated, and all of them carried the invisible fingerprints of Lorenzo Greer. One night, as the pressure mounted, Emily confronted Nathan, her voice tense but steady. "It's him, isn't it?" "Lorenzo." Nathan's jaw clenched. "Yes." His voice was low, hard. "He won't stop. And this time, it's not just me he's after. It's you. It's this foundation." But Emily's eyes did not flinch. Instead, they blazed. "If he thinks he can break us," she said, her voice sharp with defiance, "then he's underestimating who I am, and who we are." Nathan felt something stir inside him. It was something he hadn't felt in years. Strength, but not the lonely, ruthless strength of fighting alone. The unbreakable strength of fighting beside someone who believed in him. And so, with resolve burning between them, Nathan offered his hand. Then, he said, his voice sure and steady, we fight. Together. Emily's fingers closed firmly around his, her eyes, bright, fierce, unyielding, and her voice rang with a promise. This time, Nathan, we win. The battle was fought on every front. When lies hit the headlines, Nathan reached out to Peter Hayes, a veteran investigative journalist, a man who hunted the truth and never bowed to power. Peter, Nathan said, his voice tight with urgency, I have something you'll want to see. But it's dangerous. Peter, grinning with the sharp edge of a hunter scenting prey, replied, Nathan, danger is why I get out of bed. With Peter's help, they began exposing the trail, the shell companies, the false claims, the money trails, all leading back to Lorenzo Greer. But the darkest blow was yet to come. One rainy night, Nathan received a sealed envelope from a trusted source. Inside, a single report. It revealed that someone from inside the foundation had leaked private documents and collaborated with Lorenzo, and the name was one Nathan never expected. Margaret, Emily's mentor, her friend, the woman who saved her life. Then, the hardest decision Emily had ever made. Leave, she said, her voice like ice. Go. Now. Margaret, eyes brimming. Emily, please forgive me. But Emily, her eyes, wet with pain, answered, in a whisper carved from heartbreak, I don't know if I ever will. Margaret, gone. And with her, the last piece of Emily's innocence. The headlines screamed with scandal. Loose Nova Foundation linked to fraud. Investors withdraw funding. Foundation accounts frozen. The walls were closing in. The truth struck like a knife. Emily, shattered, confronted Margaret that very night. Her voice, raw with heartbreak. Why? Emily demanded, her voice trembling with grief. Why did you do this to me? Margaret's eyes, heavy with guilt, fell. Her voice, broken, whispered, because he threatened my family. Her voice cracked. I tried to stop it, but he left me no choice. Emily's hands, shaking, her heart splintering, but her voice, though cold, did not break. You were my family. A long silence. The war for the foundation reached its peak. Nathan and Emily fought side by side, countering every attack, every lie, every blow from Lorenzo Greer's unseen hand. But Lorenzo played dirty, and his next move was his lowest yet. An anonymous email exploded across the media. Loose Nova Foundation under investigation for money laundering. The scandal hit like a bomb. Investors fled overnight. The foundation's accounts were frozen. Reporters swarmed, hungry for the fall of a hero. Emily, who had spent her life climbing from the streets to this very place, stood on the edge of losing everything she had built. But this time, she was not alone. Nathan, hardened by his own falls and betrayals, stood beside her. We'll fight this, he said, his voice a promise. Together. But the worst betrayal had already cut its wound. Margaret, Emily's mentor, her guide, her family, had sold them out. Emily on the verge of losing everything. And then Nathan stepped forward, his voice unshakable. Emily, I lost everything once because I trusted no one. But you, his voice low, raw, you trusted me. So now I fight for you. Emily, her voice thick with emotion. I've fought my whole life, but never with someone beside me. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, two hearts, scarred, battered, became one force. Together, she said, a vow unbreakable. We end this. Confronted, Margaret broke, her voice cracking with guilt and sorrow. Lorenzo threatened my family. I tried to stop it, but Emily's voice, though cold and shaking with heartbreak, did not break. You were my family. Margaret, eyes filled with regret, whispered, Emily, I'm sorry. But the pain in Emily's voice was unshakable. Go. Now. And just like that, another piece of her past. Gone. Yet in the wreckage, something fierce remained. As the world turned against them, Nathan reached for Emily. Not to save her, but to stand with her. I lost everything once, he said, his voice raw. Because I fought alone. I won't let you lose. Because you trusted me. Emily's eyes, shining with tears, met his. "I've fought alone my whole life. But this time," she squeezed his hand, the fire of her heart burning through every word. "We fight together." Nathan made the first move, calling Peter Hayes, the journalist who lived for truth. "Peter," he said, "it's time." Peter's voice, sharp with anticipation, answered, "Then let's bring the house down." While Peter dug through Lorenzo's financial webs, Emily worked from another front. Sleepless nights spent tracing transactions, chasing encrypted messages, until she found it. The proof. Lorenzo had not only blackmailed Margaret but falsified every accusation against the foundation. With a single call, she delivered the evidence to Peter, and in the next day's headlines, the truth exploded like wildfire. Breaking. Lorenzo Greer linked to fraud, blackmail, and witness coercion. Luce Nova Foundation cleared of all charges. The tide turned. Lorenzo's empire began to crack. But Emily wasn't done. She wanted more than victory. She wanted justice. And justice would be served not with a whisper, but with a reckoning. That night, as the police closed in on Lorenzo's offices, Nathan waited in the shadows. When the doors burst open and the authorities poured in, Lorenzo's eyes, cold and sharp, found Nathan's. "So," Lorenzo hissed, his voice dripping with venom, "you've won your little game." But Nathan, steady as stone, answered, "This was never a game, Lorenzo. It was a choice. You chose power. I chose what's right." Lorenzo's smile, bitter and jagged, curled. "You think this is over? The business world never forgets." Nathan's reply, low and final, "Good, because neither do I." Lorenzo was taken in cuffs. His empire crumbled. His threats turned to echoes in an empty room. The headlines screamed the downfall of a giant. But at the Luce Nova Foundation, the real victory was not in what they defeated, but in what they protected. In the days that followed, hope returned. Investors who had fled now came back, not because of profit, but because of belief. The foundation reopened, stronger than ever. And on the night of its reopening, Emily stepped before the crowd. Her voice carried not just her story, but every story like hers. "I was once a girl who lived on the streets, and what brought me here was not luck. It was a chance. A single act of kindness, a $100 bill that lit a fire in me that never died." She paused, her eyes finding Nathan in the crowd. "But no one climbs alone. What I built with him." She gestured to Nathan, her voice ringing clear and true. "Because sometimes what we need is not a handout but someone who believes in us." The applause rose like thunder. But to Emily, only one thing mattered. The look in Nathan's eyes. Not of pride, but of partnership. As the crowd cheered, a new plaque was unveiled at the entrance of the foundation. Its words, carved in gold, read, "In honor of every small spark that can ignite a new world." Emily and Nathan stood before it, not as hero and benefactor, not as businessman and survivor, but as equals. Two people who learned that the greatest victories are not won alone but together, and that sometimes a single act of kindness can change the world forever.